Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier. Thank you for stopping by. I trust the week's gone well. They do whiz by, don't they? If you haven't had a chance to have a look at an interview I did with Raman Yang on CCTV about Kenya's Eurobond, that link's on the front of the website and on Rich Wrap-Ups. And I said on the 26th of May that I surmise that Kenya will be satisfied if it can sell at a yield of 6.5%. And at that time I was assuming they were going to do just one issue. They ended up doing two. And I said 6.5%, and if it was a small issue size, and close to 7 if it goes for a supersized issue of 2 billion. That was on the 26th of May, and they very cleverly did 1.5 billion, which meant it wasn't supersized, so it came within that trading range I was speaking about. And do have a look at the presentation I made at Deloitte. I get a chance there once a year to sort of take a look at the world, and then come down to Africa and Kenya, which I did. I always enjoy it. I'd like to thank, quite a busy day yesterday, I'd like to thank His Excellency Gil Haskell, the Ambassador of Israel to Kenya, for the invitation yesterday to the Israel-Kenya Business Seminar. And there were many interesting points made, and I liked this one from Honourable Avigdor Liberman. We came to talk business, plain and simple, he said. I'll put up his photograph. I'd like to thank His Excellency the Swedish Ambassador for an excellent lunch. It was a pleasure meeting very interesting C. Coleman Esquire of Goldman Sachs, and I thank Johan for that invitation. And I thoroughly enjoyed the Queen's birthday party celebrations last night, notwithstanding the very British weather. I got there early and had a very fine time. In fact, I was scolded by my wife, so I was way too jolly, which I probably was. And I'd like to thank Dr. and Mrs. Christian Turner. I'll put up a photograph that I took from the bar at the back. It was in a great big tent. We filmed Christian's speech, so I'm going to post that on the website and on YouTube in the not too distant future. And finally, we had a great old laugh with Christian driving around a Jaguar F-Type, and Sanjeev of RMA Kenya managed to dig out a number plate with 007 on it, so it was all a lot of fun. Macro thoughts: we could see a super spike in the price of oil, I think. Home thoughts go back to Pynchon. If they can get you asking the wrong questions, they don't have to worry about answers. A screaming comes across the sky, and that's said to be very prescient of the September 11 event in the US. The one word that rips apart the day. That's Gravity's Rainbow. An explosion without an objective, declared Miles Blundell, is politics in its purest form. I'll put up a photograph of Gravity's Rainbow, which is a very good book, I must admit. Political reflections. President Barack Obama said on Thursday he was sending up to 300 US military advisors to Iraq, and I think that's the least he could do in the circumstances. He's a very reluctant intervener because it's quite complex. ISIS is clearly supported by very close allies of the president, such as Qatar and Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. I think and one's got to contextualize it in that sense. The other point is, I think it's a tool with which to further weaken Iran. Syria, of course, has been weakened, notwithstanding the fact that Iran and Syria have come through that, but at what cost? Now you soften up the other side with Iraq, and therefore, you can see why it is an instrument, I think. ISIS is an efficient, experienced and fanatical movement with a reputation for striking back at any enemy, says Patrick Coburn. He says if its fighters start being killed by US aircraft, it may not be long before it sends its suicide bombers against American targets inside or outside the US to exact revenge. President Obama said that it is not our job to choose Iraq's leaders when asked if Maliki would step aside. Bear in mind, furthermore, that ISIS has taken vast swathes of land. This is in the Sunni heartland, and it would be a very different prospect, trying to get into Baghdad, of course. Therefore, at this point in time, whilst it's been a lightning strike, I think it might have reached its maturity, as it were, in terms of geographical gains. I'll put up a photograph of the Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki. Then Bloomberg, Iran sees its security threatened by the tidal wave of Sunni extremists moving ever closer to the border. If the Iraqi government were to crumble, Iran would take it as a direct and imminent, immediate threat. In another piece I read on Global Research, the link is on Rich Wrap-Ups, what is folding is a process of constructive chaos, which is a fact. Going then to Ukraine, Kiev has attempted for the past 2 months to bring the East to heel, yet the regime has little to show for the effort. However, I learned today President Poroshenko has unveiled a 14-point peace plan after a phone call with President Putin of Russia. And then this quote caught my attention from a video in Reuters, a 12-year-old Honduran migrant. What I want is to progress, don't we all? Saudi King Abdullah will visit Egypt on Friday for the first time since the 2011 uprising in a show of support. For the newly elected President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. Saudi Arabia and other Gulf nations showered Egypt with billions of dollars in aid after el-Sisi, then the army's top general, overthrew Mohamed Morsi. The first world leader to congratulate Sisi after winning last month's election was King Abdullah. He's been on the throne for nearly a decade and is almost 90. The monarch declared that the turmoil sparked by the Arab Spring should now come to a close. The brotherly Egyptian people have suffered during the past period of chaos. The short-sighted call it creative chaos, the king said in a letter published by the Saudi state news agency. He called for a donors conference to help Egypt get out of the tunnel, referring to its wrecked economy. I'll put up his photograph. And then if you've got time, there's this very good radio interview with Professor Michael Chossudovsky, and he's positing that the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant is an instrument of the Western military alliance. And it's pretty in-depth and pretty worthwhile listening to. Yellen is a super dove, Lex Van Dam, a fund manager at Hampstead Capital LLP in London, said in an interview. The equity market certainly thinks so. The S&P rose 0.1% to a record in New York. The benchmark index advanced for a 5th straight day, the longest streak since April. The Dow Jones closed 0.1% higher. The Nasdaq slipped 0.1% after reaching a 14-year high. The MSCI All Country World Index added 0.6% today to a record. So you can see the market certainly like Yellen and her dovish tendencies. I'll put up a 1-year chart of the Nasdaq, S&P and Dow Jones. S&P is trading at about 16.6 times projected earnings, whereas the MySex, by the way, is about 5.6, and at one point was at 3.4, which is when I said you should buy it. Euros at 136.24, that's resilient. Dollar has declined 0.6% this week. Biggest drop since April 11. Dollar index back lower, 80.23. Japanese yen 101.89. Swissy 0.8930. Pound, that's popped its head above 170. It's 170.56, and that's a 5.5-year high. Aussie 0.9405. And that's poised for a 4-week gain. Indian rupee soft to 60.27. Concerns that the rupee remains hostage to the geopolitical tensions in the Middle East. Higher oil price. South Korean won 10.2071, and the won has risen 12% in the past 12 months versus the dollar. Rial 222.26, Egyptian pound 7.15.20, South African rand gave up some ground overnight, 10.73.18. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the euro dollar, and that's really traded in a resilient manner given the the actions that have been taken by the ECB. Dollar index 80.23, unable to get through those levels overhead at 80.85 and 81. The Bloomberg dollar spot index gauge is at its lowest since May 21st. Sterling, I'll put up a 5-day chart. We're now over 170, 170.55. I saw it trade this morning. I wrote about this on the 12th of August 2013 when I said, how does an investor play this recovery? And I said, you need to be net long sterling. And it's reached a 5.5-year high, traded as high as 170.63, which was the highest since October 21st, 2008. Coming to the commodity markets, gold had a huge rally yesterday, up 3.3%, and is back above 13.46. Crude oil, and I'll put up a 5-day chart of this, and I think there's a huge risk of a super spike because the situation now in Iraq is so fluid, anything can possibly happen. And I think one can't discount it, very well might, because this is, who would have thought that a jihadist group would control such huge swathes of territory. Brent crude climbed to 115.71 yesterday, which was the highest since September. Frontier markets, the yield on Iraq's $2.7 billion of sovereign securities due January 2028 jumped 88 basis points to 7.29% in Dubai. I think that would be a buy, a big drop off, simply because the question is not about Iraq's ability to pay, is it? But I suppose concerns might be raised that what happens in the event of a fragmentation. Very interesting essay by Razia Khan of Standard Chartered Bank about how fast is Africa really growing, saying Africa is rising, but poor data availability means that we can't be sure by how much. She talks of proxies that help shed some light. Chinese customs data show that Africa-China trade ballooned to $210 billion last year, from $5 to $7 billion at the end of the 1990s. Lending to the private sector in Africa has also surged, with private sector credit growth more than doubling in real terms between 2000 and 2010. Such data points aside, however, little is known about the true magnitude of Africa's growth surge. And basically, it's a very in-depth essay, well worth reading. And she concludes by saying Africa is rising, and soon we might be able to gauge how fast. Our best guess, probably faster than we've thought all along. South African all shares closed at a fresh record high last night, and it's plus 10.8245% this year. I know there's a general bearish tone in South African assets, but I think the economy is not going any lower. The question is when it picks up, but it's certainly based out in my view, and that's why I thought the ratings agencies were behind the curve. Dollar rand 10.7445, still in this range from 10.30 to about 11 that we've been in for a little while. Egyptian pound 715.24. The Egyptian stock market fell 1.18% yesterday, but remains plus 22.9725% this year and is Africa's best. The Nigerian all share, which rallied about 10% over the last 8 weeks, nevertheless remains down 0.6311%. The government is saying Nigerian militants aiming for the capital with petrol lorry attacks. The Nigerian security services have received intelligence to the effect that insurgents intend seizing petrol tankers and planting improvised explosive devices in the tankers and driving them to crowded places in Abuja. This is a senior Ministry of Information official in a statement late on Wednesday. Then, an interesting aside, a military spokesman told Reuters on Wednesday that security forces had discovered a senior Boko Haram member among a convoy of nearly 500 travelers arrested this week in the southern state of Abia. The presence of a high-ranking militant in the south would stoke fears insurgents are targeting the mainly Christian south. It would also raise concern they could eventually attempt attacks in the oil-rich Niger Delta. The Ghana Stock Exchange is up 9.7435%, but of course you've lost all that and some via currency freefall. US has imposed military and aid sanctions against Uganda over the anti-gay law, which by the way is very, very popular, and that's by President Museveni probably picked that fight. The United States on Thursday cancelled a regional military exercise in Uganda, imposed visa restrictions, diverted funds for a health institute to another country, and cut funding for a Ugandan police program in response to a law that imposes harsh penalties for homosexuality. Senior U.S. administration officials speaking before the announcement by the White House said the stepped-up measures were carefully targeted at those responsible for abuses related to implementation of the anti-gay law and involved in corruption. The idea is to send a signal to perpetrators and would-be perpetrators that we are indeed monitoring, that we are indeed prepared to take measures, and that there are consequences, a senior administration official told Reuters. And I'll put up a photograph of one of the front pages that the Guardian picked up on. Ivory for sale in Angola, big tuskers die in Kenya. The craft market just north of Angola's capital sells paintings, hand-carved wooden animals, and newly woven baskets. It also sells more than 10,000 pieces of ivory, making it the largest market in southern Africa to openly sell elephant tusks, an illegal trade. Across the African continent in Kenya, two of the country's biggest tuskers was slaughtered by poachers. The phenomena are interconnected. The international ivory trade is threatening to wipe out Africa's elephants. Tens of thousands of elephants are being killed for their ivory tusks each year continent-wide. And while experts say there's been a decline in elephant poaching, they say more needs to be done as the deaths of the beloved pachyderms in Kenya show. At the Benfica market near Luanda, Angola, two animal researchers recently counted 10,026 pieces of ivory for sale. Necklaces, bracelets, carved figurines, and whole tusks. And that huge count didn't include backup inventory the sellers kept nearby. I was flabbergasted because it was so big, said Esmond Martin, one of two researchers publishing a paper in an upcoming issue of Traffic Bulletin, a wildlife trade journal. It's completely illegal. Kenya this month mourned the poaching deaths of Mountain Bull, the patriarch elephant of the Mount Kenya region, whom I think came across one day in the Gari forest, and Satao, a 45-year-old bull, now some experts believe was the largest on earth. Poachers killed him with a poisoned arrow, a great life lost so that someone far away can have a trinket on their mantelpiece, the Sawe Trust said in announcing Satao's death. Achim Steiner, who I caught up with this week and is the head of the Kenya-based United Nations Environmental Programme, said Thursday that such killings fill him with deep frustration. I think it's both a tragedy and a travesty that in this day and age we're not able to contain, manage what ultimately is an act of irresponsibility that can lead to the extinction of species forever. In Angola, though, no one seemed to care. And then talking about the prices, a beaded ivory necklace that was priced at $30 in Angola sells for about $450 in China. A medium-sized $100 bangle in Angola costs $850 in China. A $500 human figurine in Angola costs 5 times that in China. Steiner says a sliver of hope is emerging because governments are taking steps to fight poaching, such as deploying new technologies, passing tougher laws, adding military personnel to the anti-poaching efforts. We are seeing in many African countries the first signs of a turning of the curve and the beginnings or reduced number of poached elephants, he said. And that is perhaps the second important personal reaction. Don't just despair, it can be changed, it is changing, and we need everyone on board. In this photo taken Sunday, March 2, 2014, Chinese visitors look at souvenirs made of ivory for sale at the Benfica market on the outskirts of Luanda, Angola. And on that note, I'll put up a photograph of the elephants crossing the Owasso-Nyiro River that I found one day when I went to the Samburu. Kenyan security forces kill 5 coast attack suspects. This is a report on Reuters. 5 suspected attackers shot dead while escaping. 3 AK-47 guns and several ammunitions recovered, the Interior Ministry said on Twitter, locating the incident in Lamu County. A Kenyan army source, asked not to be named, confirmed 5 suspects were killed in a forested area during a combined operation involving the army and other security forces. My conclusions remain several. First of all, I remain concerned that our response to it has become so politicized, and I think the politics is a sideshow. And I think the confluence of Al-Shabaab and more local franchises is evidenced in the choice of this particular target. If you go into the historical past, you'll understand why. I was sitting at dinner with a lady, and basically the president's father settled some of his tribesmen there. And I was speaking to a lady at dinner earlier this week, and she said to me, but Ali Khan, the people who were settled there were also unhappy because their land was taken in Central Province. They were unhappy that they were just dropped there. So quite a number of sub-narratives to the main narrative. I was going through Twitter and I came across some pretty punchy tweets from EU in Kenya, and I've invited Ambassador Ludovic Breet to be at Main Speak. But one of his tweets is, Kenya is a sophisticated country with huge potential held back by poisonous rhetoric. Conspiracy theory is off the wall, complete nonsense. Kenya shilling was last at 87.405, and it's improved from those levels just above 88 that it pressed on not too long ago. The Nairobi All shares up 9.3377% this year, 2.135% below a record high set on the 12th of May. NEC 20 is down 2.618%, but it's rebounded 33 points since the 17th of June. KQ apparently has launched an in-flight television station. The station will air live news and sports subscription channels. Of course, we did that interview with Captain Koki Mutungi. If you get a chance, have a look at that. And just final point to note, Equity Bank closed at a fresh record yesterday. It's plus 44.715%, and lots of excitement around its mobile banking channel strategy. I therefore wish you a great weekend.